Hello and welcome to another edition of Press Row here on Rivalry Family Media. I'm Todd Robbins. Happy to have you along with us as we continue with questions and answers and talking to movers and shakers in the world of Central Mass athletics and beyond. Happy to have with us as a guest today Colin Davis, head coach of Leominster High School lacrosse, also a teacher in both the English and Latin departments. Coach, I saw from the website that has been a very specialized course. People don't realize that Leominster has offered for a number of years and still continues to offer it today, when Latin, in a lot of places, has kind of gone by the wayside. Very important to keep that going in Leominster.
Yeah, it's funny, and thank you for having me, by the way. It's funny, the way it worked out. I was a classics minor and English major. I teach English mainly, but there's, a smaller group of students that really wanted to continue studying Latin after the legendary Miss Chester retired from
Yes.
Leominster High. And so I said, I'd be happy to take on a class. They're great kids. I've really enjoyed kind of getting back into it. This is my 17th year of teaching, so it's nice to do something different. And that class has been a great experience for me, brushing up on my declining skills and all that stuff.
It may in some ways be seen as a dead language, but for those who are, interested in perhaps the all-important medical field these days or any kind of a legal career, it could be a great, head start going off to college.
Absolutely. And even with English vocabulary, it's so huge. So much of our language comes from Latin and Greek. So one of the major things we do in that class is we talk about just kind of the etymology of words and how they make it to English from Latin. And, some of them go through other languages, but I think it helps them with their vocabulary. I think a lot of parents think like, oh, this is really going to help with SATs, but I think it helps with like reading comprehension and all that good stuff. So it's been a lot of fun. It's my first period class, so it's a great way to start the day. And then we get into some writing later on.
Maybe that would have been better for me. Those 3 years in Spanish just it didn't pan out the way I had always hoped. Maybe Latin would have been my way to go. Coach, it is great having you here with us on Press Row, and I want to talk a lot about some of the things that have been going on, obviously, in this world with the COVID-19 pandemic and how it's affecting spring sports, as well as kind of where we're going with high school athletics in the years to come. And you win the award for passion in social media posts as you've gotten the certainly the opportunity to kind of express yourself in a number of different ways. And this is where social media can be a really great tool, is to express positivity when, perhaps it is at times seen as a pool of negativity. So there's been some great Twitter posts. We're going to use those to guide our conversations a little bit. And we'll start first with a fun one. This was from this past Sunday for Coach Davis. And it said, quote, "I think I did some damage to my shoulder just from vigorously wiping down everything that comes into our house from outside. Quote, me as an adult, in all seriousness, 2020 is the weirdest." Coach, what happened this past week?
Well, we've been, stocking up on our groceries. My son and I both have asthma, so we're trying to be extra careful with everything that comes into the house and staying home and doing everything we're supposed to do. So I had those disinfectant wipes out, wiping down the groceries. Don't trust anybody, wipe everything down, and it's just part of life right now. Everyone's trying to stay safe and stay clean and disinfected, and I might have been exaggerating a little bit. I got some bad shoulders anyway, but I was also taking some credit. I wiped down most of the groceries, so maybe a little side shot at my wife.
She might point out somebody had to have procured those groceries somewhere along
Correct.
the way as well.
That's very
Of course, from there, Coach, some of the posts last week on social media that were interesting and conversations that kind of started this back and forth and got me thinking this would be a great opportunity to bring you in was some posts that where you pointed out and vented your frustration at some of that negativity, on Twitter, particularly when it comes to some of those keyboard bandits and their attacks on athletes and athletics in this time, of course, of a global pandemic. Last Thursday, you said, quote, "Anyone calling high school or college kids, especially seniors, babies or spoiled for grieving the experience they look forward to for 18 to 22 years, maybe reevaluate your perspective, perhaps stop projecting your own misery, failure, and negativity in experience on them, or maybe just don't say anything at all." I think that sums up quite a bit of what the problem sometimes with social media can be.
Yeah, in this particularly sensitive time for especially the class of 2020, and that includes high school, college, even eighth grade kids graduating from their elementary school even. The loss of these experiences is not to be discounted, and it's not to minimize the impact of what's happening globally. You know, uh, it's scary time. It's horrifying. Nobody can really predict what's going to happen right now. But to get on these kids for grieving things that I think anybody in their position would grieve, and they do it in many different ways, and most of them are acceptable and some of them are not. But like my point there was just like, put yourself in their position. The kid who's been looking forward to his senior year, maybe waiting behind a backup for a couple of years, and with spring sports looking so up in the air right now, they're starting to wonder, am I ever going to get this shot? And for the kids who don't go on to play college sports, that's a loss. It may not be a bigger loss than somebody else suffers, but that's a loss. And to discount it and to call people names over it, that's one thing where, I call my students my kids. I call my players my kids. I'm going to stick up for my kids there. There are some things that high schoolers will say that I won't stand behind, but, you know, they're well within their rights, whether it's a winter athlete, a spring athlete, to be worried about this stuff. And the other school experiences too, the graduations, the proms that are, we just don't know what's going to happen with them right now. It's okay for our kids to feel their feelings. And I think that's really important.
And a lot of those are once in a lifetime experiences. And I think sometimes what people discount, and I will say, by the way, as a fellow educator, I too refer to my kids as I don't have any kids of my own. So I quite frequently refer to my kids that way, who are my students as well. So I'm totally with you in that. You take a certain personal ownership in their education, their life experiences. So I certainly appreciate that. But for a lot of students, especially student athletes, for some, school might not be their thing, but what gets them in the door every day is the opportunity to go to that secondary classroom and get to athletics in the afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a huge part. And you know what's funny is it's not just sports. It's the drama club. We have such a wonderful theater company at Leominster High School. And these kids put on one of the last school events I went to was a performance of Lord of the Flies in the Leominster High School, the Cousins Auditorium there. And my God, I felt like I was watching a Broadway production. They were incredible. And, their competitions have been interrupted. All kinds of clubs and other extracurricular activities are going through the same thing. Obviously, I feel it from a sports perspective the most with lacrosse, but I'm definitely hearing it from all kinds of kids, from all kinds of different activities. It's really tough. And I view basically a lot of my job right now is to just help them get through this mentally and stay positive and stay hopeful and stay believing that we'll get back to normal someday.
And sometimes in education, it's about more than just the curriculum we teach. Broadly, it's about how those students develop as people, and this is certainly going to be a blip on the proverbial radar of their development as both people and experiences along the way. Later on that same day, and perhaps double strike underlining the point you had made in your earlier tweet, Carl Setterlund, sports writer and reporter for the Telegram and Gazette, who does a marvelous job, replied to a colleague in a report that they had noted where there was continued hope for a spring 2020 season. And his comment was real short. It's never going to happen. To which you initially replied, this may be true, but the upside of tweeting that is what? The necessity to cancel something that far away when it could be canceled later is what? The necessity to dash the hope of any high school kid who cares very much about this despite the odds. Don't understand or don't get it, sir, is the point that you made. And I thought that was, very directly spoken and kind of speaking out on behalf of a lot of the athletes and the coaches as well, is that at this moment in time, while we understand incrementally things, have to be canceled as we move along and progress and get farther into the calendar year, there's no point in right away. And this is probably a credit the MIA, who takes a lot of criticism, is getting. They're doing everything they possibly can to create an opportunity for spring 2020 sports to happen. And you certainly didn't appreciate somebody taking that negative tact.
No, and it was a timing issue too. That hadn't been out for very long. It was a hopeful message for our athletes. I was forwarding it to them with just to keep their hopes up and their spirits high. And, I'm aware the reality is we may not go back on May 4th and we may push it even further. And, I don't know what that means for spring sports, but my kids right to hope for the best and hope for their season. We were really excited about our team this year. uh, you know, the, I was pretty upset by that. I have a lot of respect for Carl. He interviewed me for a story probably like 10 years ago, so I know he's been in the business a long time, and maybe he was just feeling really negative about it that day. You know, I have no personal issue with him. He's a good reporter. I just took umbrage with just kind of like you said, better verb, dashing the hopes of these kids. Really not appropriate at that time, I didn't think, especially considering, you know, I didn't really verbalize this the best, but Carl's reach is mostly in high school sports, I think, on Twitter. And, kids read him and kids react to that. And I was just upset that on that day where they got a little bit of hope to get that negativity mixed in also, that was tough for me to handle. So I felt like I should speak up. And, we kind of had a back and forth over a couple of days. Nothing, not constantly, probably like every 24 hours for a couple of days, because I'm sure he's busy and I'm busy. But, we bandied a few things back and forth, and it was pretty respectful, I think. I think the one thing I did was call him Dr. Carl Fauci, but, it is what it is. I was upset. I want to defend my kids, and I want to keep them positive and hopeful.
And positive and hope is what we need later on in that post stream. I think you got to the crux of your argument beyond what you were just saying, which was, quote, most of the coaches I know would coach in June, July, and August for these kids. So delays are greater than cancellations for the moment.
Absolutely. I've already communicated to Coach Palazzi. I have no idea what like the legal ramifications are for holding things in July and August with the school fiscal year and all that jazz. I am far removed from that process and no expert in it. So what I just wanted to get out there to Coach Palazzi, our athletic director now, was, hey man, I'm available in July and August. I am more than happy to coach these kids. I'll make the mid-watch B schedule if coaches want me to do it. Like I'm all in to help to any form of this spring season we can get out, as long as it's safe. I'm all in for. And so, and I understand it may not be, but I just want to keep hope alive for these kids as long as possible. I have a group of seniors that I love, a whole program that I love, but a group of seniors that have put in so much work, and we kind of been building to this season. And so, it's been really tough to have it delayed and things like that when kids like, Evan Philandes and Nico Cordio and Theron Glenn and Cam DeWolf and Zach Moran and all these seniors, Kobe Luong, who came over from Fitchburg this year, Dylan Wild, who came in from St. John's, Bailey Elaine, Dom Tata, Lucas Taylor, Zach Melanson and Anthony Tossi were going to come out and try lacrosse this year as seniors. They didn't really get that opportunity. I'm sure I'm missing guys, Mike Rochette, I'm sure I'm missing guys, but, especially for that group, I've been just trying to reach out to them and keep them positive and keep them, hopeful and working and doing their individual work, staying the heck away from each other, but doing individual work, wall ball, cardio, taking care of their schoolwork, make sure you're going to be eligible if we do have a season, and make sure you're passing your classes just in general, and all that stuff. And the other, like my mantra has been try to control what you can control, stay positive, get outside when you can, and just keep working and hope for the best.
Let's talk a little bit about that 2020 group, of course. Leominster Lacrosse has been a growing program year in and year out, and obviously a lot of that growth is starting to now really flourish at this time. And of course, it would be so difficult to have a year where you have experienced such great growth, and of course that is built on incremental growth over years, to have a year where lacrosse may not ultimately be played. Talk a little bit about that growth and development, and of course your experience within the program.
So the first thing I have to say is we sure did it backwards in Leominster. We started a high school team far before we had a youth team, which was probably not advisable, but it was a lot of fun. And then, some volunteer gentlemen who are basically angels for my program, Larry Cordio, Trent Larson, and more recently, guys like Larry Bolak have taken over Leominster Youth Lacrosse, which also it benefits Lunenburg, it benefits Fitchburg, which I know they've combined with Lunenburg now. But we're getting kids from a couple different towns. I say we because my son is 8. He's been playing U9 lacrosse for the last couple of years, Jack, and he loves it, and he's really into it. He's been getting his wall ball in. He's worried about his season too. You know, it's one of those things that's affecting everybody. And you know, the way that Leominster Youth Lacrosse has impacted my program, we would need hours to talk about that. All the volunteers, I could not appreciate them more. I try to volunteer as much of my time as I can. It's kind of tough with our season and their season concurrently going on, but you know, I've been able to help coach Jack's team with Sean Comley and Sean Roberts, and that's been a wonderful experience. Those guys are great. Our U9 team is a bunch of animals, so we're hoping to get out there with them this season as well.
One of the things you pointed out, one of your former players, Mike Fratarelli, had a post celebrating a memory from 9 years ago, and he said, 9 years ago today, Leominster Youth Lacrosse recorded its first win in program history. What a journey it's been since then. How would you describe that journey?
I would say that it's been, you know, a low-level roller coaster. The lows have never been super low. The highs obviously have not been as high as we want them to be. We would like to someday, you know, be a district champion, be a state champion. But we've won a league championship. We've won a lot of games. I think somewhere in the 120s now. You know, we are now a team in Midwatch B that is considered, you know, somebody who any given year could compete for that league title. And when you consider, you know, the strengths of some of these other programs and the socioeconomics of the teams in that league, it's a pretty impressive feat for a school like Leominster to be in there. Now, obviously, someday we'd love to get up to Midwatch A and compete with those guys. But like you said, it's been incremental. And the way that Leominster Youth Lacrosse has impacted that is it just changes the baseline of our incoming player. So we're no longer teaching cradling and passing and catching at high school varsity tryouts, which, you know, the top teams in the state, they're not doing that on the first couple of days of all that time, volunteers.
No, without a doubt. And of course, I think to myself back, you know, 10 or 15 years ago when I was in high school, and even within the community, I mean, lacrosse in and of itself was just not a thing here in central Massachusetts and maybe in Massachusetts more broadly. I mean, back then I would have seen lacrosse more as a mid-Atlantic state or an upstate New York sport and really didn't get exposed to it, as I was saying before we went on the air, until I went to college at Syracuse. And then it was, you know, kind of trial by fire. You had to learn the sport on the fly as a broadcaster when you had never seen it before. So you had this opportunity to be involved in bringing a brand new sport where there was clearly a movement. Players were interested in bringing it here. There was clearly a movement to an area both as a youth team and as a high school team where it really was an unknown. I mean, people just didn't understand it because they had never seen or experienced it before. What was that like, trying to get people to take that leap of faith?
So, I mean, first of all, in a town like Leominster, where football is obviously king still, I think, well, not I think, at the time we started our lacrosse program, the legendary Emil Johnson's still coaching. He's racking up like his 600th win in my first or second season, I think. So, you know, there was some concern that, you know, am I going to get athletes, or are these guys just going to, you know, go to baseball or keep focusing on football? But what I've found, I've been blessed to coach in Leominster. We got kids who love to compete, kids who are tough, kids who work hard, and you know, it's been such a blessing for me to be here, and I've just loved it. Like, these kids come out and you know, from day one they were afraid of nobody. My very first team demanded that I put St. John's on our schedule. We didn't know what lacrosse field lines look. I did, but they didn't. we had never seen a lined lacrosse field until our first game that year against Wachusett. And then, they're demanding we put St. John's on the schedule. They tattooed us like 16-0. It probably could have been 40-0. They were very classy about it. But it just showed me right away, like, man, Leominster kids are not afraid of anything. and that's just kind of been the philosophy for a long time. We'll play anybody. We respect our competitors, but we're ready to go. And I love that mentality. I love that mindset that jives really well with my personality and what I'm trying to get out of my team. So it's been a lot of fun. I can't believe it's been 16, 17 years now, but it's been such a blast.
I think about lacrosse, and I don't think this is an overstatement as a sport in general. It is by far one of the fastest growing sports, not just here in Massachusetts, but across the United States, and particularly here in New England. How much does the fast-paced, high-scoring nature of the game, both for men and women, how much does that benefit when you're trying to get kids involved in it? I think folks who are on the other side of things in a bat ball sport struggle with sometimes the leisurely pace, getting young kids to stay focused and interested and get bitten by that sport, especially if they don't have a particular passion for it. Lacrosse has the, kind of the reverse, benefit, which is it's high scoring, fast paced. You're always touching the ball and you're always moving. That certainly seems like it does help to sell the sport when you're trying to get youth involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially in today's day and age with attention spans where they're at, adults, kids, anyone. Whenever any student of any age comes up to me and asks me about, what I think about them trying lacrosse, or would they like lacrosse, or what's it all about, I just tell them when our next game is at Doyle Field, or I tell them to come by a practice, or I tell them to go by a youth game, or YouTube any Division I college lacrosse team and watch a little bit of it. The game sells itself. I don't have to sell the game very much. The number of kids who I've thrown that bait out there when they're freshmen, like, hey, come by a game, see if you like it. And the amount of them who have come as sophomores and then tried out, it's pretty cool. And now, I have my players out there recruiting their friends and things like that as well. So we're adding in maybe other athletes who haven't played youth lacrosse to the ones who have played youth lacrosse, and they sort of ramp up each other's IQ, both competitively and then in lacrosse specifically. And that's been a lot of fun to see. But you're right, the game, especially with this generation, I think it resonates because it's so fast paced and things can happen so quickly. Momentum can change. You have that face off after every goal, so it can be make it take it for a couple minutes there, and you can really swing a game with that kind of momentum. And I think that teams are never really out of it. Mentality as well helps, but you're right. The pace of the game and the amount of stuff going on, and what I find is advantageous too is there's an opportunity for me to play up to like 20 kids in a game. So you don't have 50 kids sitting on the bench waiting their turn. A lot of you got to play a lot of bodies, whether it's from penalties or midfielders gassing out. I mean, you got to play a bunch of midfielders. You got to have 3 defensemen and a couple backups. You got to have a backup attackman ready to go with your starters. So there's a lot of guys getting out on the field in a given game. And I think that helps build your team mentality into that kind of, we always say, our family. And I think that really pushes everyone to be invested, because the barrier to you getting on the field and making an impact in the game is usually very thin, and maybe only one guy you need to beat out. So, or girl. And so, you push that competitive edge, but then everyone's invested and bought in, and it's always about, the team. And I mean, if you've ever seen one lacrosse game, you know that it is no individual game. You just can't do anything as an individual. And so you got to have the whole team on the same page. And I do think that there's some advantage with the speed and the continuity for this generation and probably future generations.
How too, by the way, does it seem like the sport of lacrosse translates in a lot of other places, right? You can reach out to athletes in other seasons who are in their off season, maybe more so than a bat ball sport could, because that's probably your direct, competition is the baseball athlete, the person who may have been, if you think about back to high school 20 and 25 years ago, who was a football player, and then in the winter likely played basketball, but maybe played ice hockey, and then likely played some form of baseball in the springtime. Now that athlete who was a football player who likes the physical contact and the wider field, or the soccer player who wants to work on footwork and speed, that may translate a lot better in a sport like lacrosse than it does to a certain degree in a bat ball sport.
Yeah, it's a great cross training sport. It's a lot of my players, it's not their first sport. I have plenty now who it is, but the Philbins are a great example. Kyle and Jack Philbin, stars of the Thanksgiving game this year. They're great defensive players in lacrosse, and part of that is due to their lineman work and linebacker work, footwork from football. And I think their quickness and agility sort of comes from their lacrosse background, and it helps their footwork in football. That crosses over to help us in lacrosse. And there's a million different examples of it too. One guy that I was after to try lacrosse this spring, and I know you recognize the name from your coverage of the tournament run, Trayvon LeBlanc. He's in my class, my composition class. I just watched him play defense with his footwork, and I thought to myself, you put a stick in those hands and it's pretty much the same kind of defense, so you can make him some kind of specialist. So he was thinking about it before all this went down. So you're right. Like you can pull kind of from any sport. Another thing I like to recruit wrestlers. They're tough. They have all this leverage work and grip strength and IQ and then of course the tenacity of a wrestler. I mean, that can go with any sport. So, we've tried to pull from, your football, your soccer, your wrestling, your basketball. Kids who get cut from baseball are more than welcome in my program. It's an open door policy with us. Really any athlete that's come over, we've had a lot of track athletes with success, especially at the midfield position. And I think it goes both ways. I think lacrosse makes them better, at something that may be their main or secondary sport in a different season.
No, without question. Of course, I tell my one deep inside knowledge lacrosse story, but it speaks to that cross training point. And again, didn't know this story till I went to Syracuse. Historically, one of the best lacrosse players ever was Jim Brown, a classic NFL Syracuse University football star, who they eventually in lacrosse had to implement the cradling rule because of Jim Brown, because when playing lacrosse at Syracuse, he would catch the ball, he would tuck the cross up against his chest, and he'd run down the field by everybody just like a running back, and then he'd throw the ball by the person who was in goal. So eventually they had to create some of that stick work rules where you could call it stick handling if you're, somebody who's not familiar, but again, cradling is the terminology in lacrosse. Those types of rules, because of a cross-trained athlete, somebody who, in lacrosse circles is seen as a fantastic lacrosse player, but historically and more broadly is seen as a phenomenal NFL legend.
Yeah, I mean, he's a legend in both sports. He's a Hall of Famer in both sports. They had to change a couple different rules for him because he was unstoppable the way the game was set up at that time. Like you said, press that stick against your chest and run down the field, and who's stopping Jim Brown? And then also, like the warding off rule, you can't push away another player with your free hand. I think that came from Jim Brown as well because, his stiff arm would put you probably halfway to Utica up there, so he's a legend. He certainly left his mark on the game. Anytime they got to change the rule, ask the Patriots, anytime they got to change the rules to defend against you, you're doing something right.
No question about that. Let's talk a little bit about that lacrosse family that you were speaking about. You had a Twitter post for them last week as well. It said, quote, social distance, wash your hands, don't touch your face, stay home, individual stick ground ball work, individual cardio, film study, be productive, be hopeful, be a Blue Devil, #family. I think that about summed up your entire philosophy, but what did you ask, or what are you currently asking when you communicate with your players for them right now? What do you want them to be doing? How do you want them focusing? as they kind of deal with this extended absence from your program?
I mean, the main message every single time is to stay safe. I want every single one of these kids coming out of this healthy, their family, their loved ones, everyone involved in my program, our school, our community, as many of them to be healthy and safe as possible. That's the push of every message I send to my students, to my lacrosse players. But for that lacrosse family, there's also that added, keep your hopes up. Don't give up. It's part of mentalities that we've been teaching these guys since they were freshmen. Um, but this is a challenge unlike anything we've ever faced as a program, as a school, as a city, as a state, as a society in general, as a country, and as a world. And so, you know, uh, obviously, you want them to keep working on their individual stick work and their cardio and then just their mental health, like just getting outside, not near other people, but maybe get outside in the sun for a little while on a beautiful day like today, and take some time to enjoy some little things and appreciate some things that you might have overlooked in the past, and just staying positive and keeping your hopes up, because until, you know, we always say until the clock's triple zeros, but right now it's, until the MIA says no, we're going to keep preparing for our season and hoping that postponements will continue to take precedence over cancellations, and hope that the entire world can heal from this, so we can get back to normal and maybe give these seniors some of these experiences that they might be missing out on right now.
Let's talk a little bit about those seniors. Some of them, should things, go in a more negative direction, and these numbers continue to grow. And obviously, if we're not able to return on May 4th, I think it will make that season awfully challenging. So for some of them, they as juniors walked off the field for the very last time, not realizing that it was their last chance to play. Talk a little bit about your seniors, what they've meant to your program, and obviously your hope for them for 2020.
My hope for them is they get a chance in any way, shape, or form to show that what they can do. If that just means playing a mid-watch B schedule in late July and early August, it is what it is. I just want to see this group of kids on the field together for some games and let them show what they can do, because the amount of work that they put in the off season, individually with their club teams, former player of mine, Coach Tyrese Perez, was running the Mohawks Lacrosse Club in the fall. They did some showcases, helping kids get looks from colleges. A lot of guys put in a lot of time there, froze their butt off at these tournaments. But overall, I think they had a real positive experience. You know, some of my seniors, just to mention individually, Evan Philandes, goalkeeper, committed to Curry. This kid, one of the best teammates you could ever ask for. He shared the net with Kenny Obashan the last 3 years, and those two together gave us a 1-2 punch I don't think any other team had. And, just knowing that if one of them got hurt or dinged up, the other one could just pop in right away. But I think probably for, more than anyone, I feel for Evan, this was his year kind of having the net to himself. He was going to get, 18 starts and hopefully more in the postseason. And the kid's a stud. He's committed to go play at Curry. He's one of the best goaltenders I've ever seen at the high school level. He was the winning goalie in the underclassmen all-star game last year. He's got these accolades stacking up, and unfortunately, it's looking like his senior year is at minimum going to be kind of compacted. And so that's a real bummer for him. But then, you've also got guys like Nico Cordio and Lucas Taylor, who have been waiting for their spot to be more of a featured player and more of a featured role on our team. And I'm sure they're frustrated by this and not having that opportunity. And then you've got returning offensive players who have already been really good for us, like Zach Moran and Theron Glenn, Cam DeWolf, guys who have scored varsity goals, a bunch of them. And they were coming back in our arsenal. And then, like I said, we've got some transfers we were pretty excited about. Kobe Luan came in from Fitchburg. That kid can play. I've been trying to stop him for 3 years. Dylan Wild, was a varsity player for St. John's last year. He's a very good athlete. He was going to be right in the mix of our midfield. We had to fill a big hole last year with Anthony Larson going on and playing at Norwich. But we needed some help in the midfield, and Dylan showed up at the perfect time. So we were excited about him. Guys like Bailey Elaine and Dom Tata, who've been waiting their turn for their opportunity. Really frustrating for them. And then like I said, you got these other guys like Zach Melanson and Anthony Tossi, the good athletes in other sports. Zach is a hockey player. Anthony's hockey and football. He played a little youth lacrosse, I think. We're going to try to bring them in and make them part of that senior leadership group this year. So right now it's hard. You got a guy like Mike Rochette who's been willing for the last 3 years to do anything we asked him to do to get better. And it was looking like his senior year, he's going to have some kind of role of getting on the field and playing some substantial minutes. And those are the guys I identify with most. I wasn't any sort of star player. I was a worker. And so I think, all those guys, and to be quite honest, anybody who was going to be on our 2020 team, because even though you're not a senior, you lose that opportunity to play with these guys. And anybody who's been in my program the last couple of years or the last 15 years, we've always had really great senior leadership and guys who are invested in making this program a family and making new players and younger kids feel welcome, even though they're competing for spots. And that's, the type of legacy that leaders like Tyrese Perez and Johnny Doherty and Ross Howlett have left for us. Cam Moran, Connor Skinner, going back, to the Delgado twins and Keenan Vela, guys who brought a league championship home to Leominster. We were hoping to have that opportunity this year, and we were feeling pretty good about it. Not that, Midwatch B is tough. Littleton is real tough. They've been the king for a long time. We were going to try to take a shot at them this year. And so, I hope we get that opportunity. Like I said, I'll keep my hopes alive as long as they're alive. And maybe we get something going in the summer, if not. But, it's really tough to not feel for and get emotional for those kids. I've been with them for a long time and I love them like family. And, right now it's just trying to keep them positive and trying to keep them hopeful because, what's the alternative? To be miserable, it doesn't help anybody.
When you, of course, are involved in sports, and it doesn't matter the sport, but in this case, of course, we're talking about lacrosse, building that family that you talk about a lot relies on, of course, being able to be together. And at this point in time, we as a society are forced very purposefully apart. How are you encouraging your players to build team, even from a distance?
So first thing I have to do is preface everything by saying from a distance. But one benefit of the kind of schooling from home is I've become a lot more proficient in Google Classroom. I don't really need it that much when I'm in front of my students. I'm more of a face-to-face, old school type of teacher, but luckily my wife, Julie, is a fourth grade teacher, and she's like the world's foremost expert in Google Classroom. So, after some tips from her and some help from some people, I was able to just kind of set up a Google Classroom for the lacrosse players and invited them all to join that. And there's a board on there where they can post to each other and we can kind of post things. And we have an application that allows us to group text like larger than 20 people. It's called GroupMe. And, just through that and through Google Classroom and, sending each other funny videos of our individual workouts in the backyard and things like that. A kid the other day sent a video of himself playing wall ball with kind of a big rock in his front yard. He's like, when you don't have a rebounder, this is what you do. And I mean, hey, the necessity is the mother of invention. So any way they can. And I think they're doing a good job of trying to keep each other's spirits up and keep working. My seniors have done a great job of showing a lot of leadership, not moping around. They're saying, hey, listen, keep your hope alive. When we get a chance to finally play, we're going to come out flying. And so, I mean, I just have to keep supporting that and keep hoping for the best and keep telling them to do the same thing because, like I said, if this group gets a chance to get on the field, they're going to do some special things. we got a couple juniors too who are coming up and getting pretty good college looks. Long stick midfielder Pete Spilios, an attackman Nathan Taylor, a midfielder Ryan Aisi. Like these guys had big roles as sophomores. These were going to be hopefully big recruiting seasons for them too. So in addition to the seniors, you do see that trickle down effect throughout the whole program, which is unfortunate. And the other thing is, I've been hearing from a lot of my guys who are playing in college now, and that wasn't a thing 10 years ago because my players didn't go on to play in college. But from Johnny Doherty at Emmanuel to Tyrese at Wentworth to Anthony at Norwich to Chris Pedowick at Southern New Hampshire, these guys had their seasons basically ended with no notice, and that's got to be. And I'm not criticizing the decision, of course. It's so jarring and sudden, and just trying to help them work through that, because that's a loss too. And for Chris, who's a senior at Southern New Hampshire, it's a big loss. And for Johnny, who was starting at Emmanuel, he worked all the way back from a torn ACL in the last game of his freshman year to start the first game of his sophomore year. And then a couple days later, it's over. For those guys, just trying to provide some support from afar as well, and letting them know that I'm happy to have a bunch of assistant coaches if we ever get out on the field this spring.
Or perhaps one really great team to play against over and over and over again, as the case may be, as well. Coach, you said a little while ago you went so far as to even volunteer to coordinate or create the schedule. Well, I'm going to take you up on that suggestion in this way. If you got the chance to be the one to coordinate, whether it's in late May, June, or July, there's been a lot of discussions on what that could look like. In your mind, ideally, what would a season entail? Severely modified, of course, but what would it look like in your mind that it would be ideal, and that would be the kind of athletic competition that would be something that would be viable?
Yeah, so I mean, the current timeline, it looks like it's going to have to be pushed back at least another couple of weeks. I mean, I'm no expert or doctor, but what I think my idea would be is to prioritize your main league, play your league schedule. Most of those league schedules are 8 to 10 to 12 games. Maybe even try to level it so everyone's playing 10 games or something. It would be great to have a postseason tournament, but it looks like it would be really tough logistically at this point. I know that kind of them saying May 4th to June 27th we could still fit in a postseason. That wouldn't be my main priority. It would be great. I think at least give these kids a chance to compete for their league title, and then see where we're at. But it's all going to depend on what the start date could potentially be, because you can't go too far into August, because you'll have players hopefully leaving to go to college next year. But yeah, I mean, I would be all on board for organizing that. Anything they need. I'm in the bargaining stage of grief right now, so I'll be willing to do whatever it takes. Like I said, as long as it's safe, I'd be happy to help or do the schedule myself. And probably the other coaches would rather have some input. But like I said, I'm just hoping for the best, and I'm willing to coach these guys in July and August, like you said. And if it comes to it and that's not possible, but it's safe enough to at least organize a Leominster-wide scrimmage, then maybe that's what we have to do. But I won't be giving up on our team season until I'm told it's done, and I'm hoping to never be told that.
I'm in the bargaining stage of grief, says the English teacher. See, it can apply more than just in the classroom as well. Coach, can't let you go without talking about, this new proposed, once we get beyond this, Massachusetts State High School tournament that's a couple of years down the road, and how that might affect lacrosse. And I think in some ways that this playoff format might be a little easier for lacrosse as compared to other sports, because of course it is still a growing sport. You guys have been kind of going beyond the traditional league lines and beyond the traditional county lines in order to find opponents, and then eventually to stage your postseason tournaments. How do you guys, in the world of lacrosse, see a statewide postseason?
Yeah, I mean, I I have some issues with it, but most of my issues with the movement is in other sports. Lacrosse, we're kind of already doing it. 5-6 years ago, they realigned the regions in lacrosse to try to make it more fair because, the growth of lacrosse in Massachusetts, it kind of was a Western Mass only. Then Eastern Mass picked it up and kind of, equaled or went by Western Mass, depending on who you ask. And Central Mass kind of got skipped over until, I don't know, the late 90s, early 2000s. And so our last playoff game, we went out and played Minnetonka. So, that's pretty far away. They're usually a Western team. We're usually a Central team. Central West is all together now. So I don't think it will affect us in Leominster very much. I don't like eliminating district titles. I just think a district title, watching our soccer team win a district title this year, was one of the most entertaining things I've done in my high school teaching career. That team was so much fun to watch. I'm dragging my 8-year-old son to games when it's 20 degrees out at night, freezing our butts off, but it was worth it. And to see what those kids achieve with Coach McCaughey, that was inspiring. Just like the basketball run with Coach Crutchfield, that was inspiring for both me and our team. And to hold up that district champion trophy, that's been a goal of ours for a long time. So kind of bummed to have that taken away and have that minimized. My honest opinion, I think it favors Eastern Mass. I don't think they need any more scales tipped in their direction. I think you make the argument that there's more teams out there and they have to go through more teams. I would argue there's also more opportunities out there. There's more opportunities to play each other. There's more clubs available to these kids in the off season. So to me, I don't know. I don't love it, but I'm not, I'm not going to bellyache about it too much for lacrosse anyway.
Yeah, I think it was fair to say from the alternative, of course, which would be more of that east to central, central to west shifting, where you're already pointing out where central and west are already kind of included together in lacrosse, taking more schools from east and piling them into central west likely would have made things worse because of the equity point you're making, where out east they have more opportunities for that club ball and development. And while you may argue that's not supposed to be considered in high school athletics, in reality, if we're going to talk about equity and division and opportunity, you can't ignore the existence of that.
Yeah, and I get it. There are more voices in Eastern Mass, and so therefore they probably have a little more say in where we're going and the guidance of that committee and the MIA in general. For me, I didn't like either option when they were presented. My choice would have been to leave everything how it was, but nobody asked me. And the other thing is, uh, when you're coaching high school or anything in any sport, you kind of got to play the hand you're dealt. And so that was the decision that was made. I probably was like, oh, that stinks. My dad asked me what I thought about it. I gave him my truly unfiltered opinion. But since then I've calmed on it and cooled a little bit and I think it's fine. The one bummer for me is just the elimination of the district titles. That's something to be celebrated and to that's however many groups of kids that get to hold up a trophy at the end of, or not the end, but in that tournament run. I think that's so valuable. So that was a bummer for me, but other than that, they're doing the best they can. And I will say this, I like anybody else have criticized the MIA on a bunch of different things. The Emily Nash thing, first of all, but a lot of other things. And I have to tip my cap to them, and I have to give them a ton of credit for what they've done in this unprecedented time, which is continue to give our spring athletes hope and to continue to do what they can. Like, one thing no one can say is that they haven't tried to make this work. And I know that's a function of the MIA, the athletic directors, and the administrators all working together to try to save this for kids in any shape or form that they can. And I couldn't have more respect for that, and I couldn't be more grateful for that. And I think my kids would say the same things. They're dying to have any sort of season that they can, and they're appreciative of any effort by anyone to make that happen.
To your point about the loss, of course, of district titles and being able to hold up that district title trophy, one of the things that I know was raised in an MIAA conversation to that point is perhaps the acknowledgement of Elite Eight, Final Four, something of that as kind of taking on an NCAA tournament where they, of course, acknowledge each of the regional winners that play into a Final Four scenario. Do you think that would be as meaningful as a district title?
I think it would be better than nothing. It will take some time to get used to. Also, I think maybe in time it could become that level, like that district title level. It'll depend on how they kind of handle the rollout of it, and if they truly do honor those teams, and if they do, maybe that can solve my main issue with the statewide tournament. There are other issues with it too. There's always the example of, well, what if Pittsfield has to play Martha's Vineyard? And I get that too. I've been on long bus rides. We play Shepherd Hill every year. We play Tingsboro every year. So, I get it. Like, long bus rides full of stinky lacrosse equipment is not ideal for anybody. But, if this is truly the most equitable and fair way, then we got to do what we can. But I would appreciate if they instead of just going and honoring that one true state champion, which is a hell of an accomplishment, I would love to see them honor these teams that make deep runs, even if they don't end up being the one team standing at the end.
Without question on that. I think one of the other linchpins that I've heard kind of debated and discussed, and actually one of your colleagues was the first one that I have heard say anything positive. We had Coach Devin Gates join us last week, and he was actually one of the first to say something nice about the Max Preps piece of this, which I have to say I've struggled most with. But he had me certainly, kind of leaning in a little bit to kind of hear, thoughts of somebody with some deep experience. I think for me as a media member, Max Preps has always struck me as Wikipedia. I use that as kind of my, anybody could sign up, anybody can put information on it. So in some way, there has to be some information security and ownership if Max Preps is going to be that deciding factor. And of course, it's important to note that decision was made long before the statewide tournament was. The MIAA had a contract with Max Preps to begin this very coming school year. So 2020, 2021, they were going to be the ranking system in all sports, regardless of the shape of what the postseason tournament looked like. But how viable do you believe Max Preps will ultimately be in being the one governing factor to pick out whether it's your district, tournament playoffs, or whether it's the top 32 or 16 teams in any given region for a statewide tournament?
So I do have an interesting perspective on this because we in lacrosse have been using it for a couple of years, ever since the site laxpower.com closed. There was a gentleman running that site, I think for free, for 30 plus years for the whole country. And I think, quite frankly, just probably got tired of doing it. And so to replace something that comprehensive where you could literally check scores and games from California on the same day, to shift over to Max Preps was certainly a difference, I think. But at the same time, it's been okay. Now, it's not the only factor that we use. It's a modified Walker system, so it's 1/3 of the factor. So going to it being the only factor, I don't know how that will look. That may be tough. But I think for the most part, it's pretty good. I haven't seen any sort of major outliers. I know in lacrosse, the tournament director, Rich Luongo, did a great job of going through and kind of eliminating any of those dummy accounts and incorrect scores and maybe programs that don't exist or have merged, because he knew he had to clean that up to make our tournament fair. And our seating meetings are always, spirited and interesting. So So he needs to have his ducks in a row for that, and he does a great job. And so with it being a third of the criteria, it was not a problem for the last couple of years in lacrosse, at least. Um, the other thing is, how do you measure score differential in some of these other sports? Lacrosse is pretty straightforward. The final score usually is a pretty good indicator of the game. Not always, but usually. Um, but how do they factor in a baseball game that was 2-1 in the seventh inning, and one team got 8 runs and it ended up being a 10-1 win, and it looks like a blowout, but it was tight until the starting pitcher came out or whatever. I don't know what that looks like. I think the good thing is the tournament directors are so dedicated. I think they will try to be out ahead and troubleshoot a lot of this stuff. And then it's on the coaches to put in the scores in a timely fashion and things like that. I have never had any major issues putting scores in or editing things on Max Preps. So I think that there's some hope for it. I do understand the hesitancy, because when we switched over, I was not excited about it, but it has turned out to be okay. So hopefully with these other sports, they will have a similar experience where you kind of work the kinks out and pretty much smooth sailing after that.
One of the concerns I know that were raised by some sports is, of course, that Max Prep's formula doesn't account for ties. They don't have the ability to understand a tie in their equation. So something has to either be a win or a loss, which means sports that perhaps don't traditionally have tie-breaking procedures or don't always worry about tie-breaking procedures now have to come up with some way to modify their high school sport rules within the current federation system in order to come up with either a win or a loss. The last thing I think people are going to want to be doing is flipping coins to determine the ends of ball games in any sport. So thoughts on perhaps how ties, may factor into this conversation?
Yeah, and I think ties are an issue for soccer, for hockey, lacrosse. Not really. We've always gone sudden death. There are no games that end in ties. No varsity lacrosse games. But for a game like soccer, are we going to go to penalty kicks for a regular season game? That seems like not a fair way to settle it. I mean, they never do seem like a fair way to settle it. But are we going to do like a breakaway contest to settle a tie hockey game? How many overtimes should we have? Those are things that are going to have to get worked out. I think I'm lucky with that. In lacrosse, we just have sudden victory overtime and just go till somebody scores, and it usually doesn't take very long in lacrosse. But occasionally you'll have a game go to double, triple, OT. I think I've been in one quadruple overtime in my coaching career in 17 years. So usually it won't go too much past that in lacrosse, but I wonder what they will do for a sport like soccer, which I'm a huge fan of our soccer team. I know football is kind of all set with their overtime rules, which is super exciting anyway. But what will they do for a hockey game that's tied? Because those, as we know, can go forever. What do you do with a baseball game that's just going on forever, or a softball game? So it's interesting to see how they will factor that in, or if they can figure out a way to sort of incorporate the ties in there.
In some way, shape, or form. I'm with you on this, that the end of that district soccer playoff run for Leominster that was involved penalty kicks was fairly exciting. And I have to imagine, if it was a regular season tiebreaker, I would imagine it would be exciting in every single game.
True. I mean, I am not knocking those penalty kicks for excitement, but I mean, I was sitting next to some mothers of some players who were pulling their hair out. And I happened to be sitting next to the coach's wife and one of them, because our children are friends. We're friends. And I mean, I wouldn't wish that kind of secondhand pressure on anybody. But no, they're certainly exciting. It is not always the best reflection of how the soccer game went up until that point. But yeah, I remember the game that was at North Middlesex, but against Westboro, they're down 2 with 12 to go. all of a sudden we're in overtime and in penalty kicks because the goalie headed in an equalizer in the last minute. It was insane. That was one of the best runs I've ever seen. We went to every game. And it was, I mean, like, I was like emotional at the end of that run, which I don't even, I'm friends with Coach Steve, but other than knowing a lot of the kids, I don't have a whole lot of skin in the game there. But I mean, it's just such a great accomplishment. You're just so happy because you know how much work went into that. And it was a lot of work with that team, with the basketball team, with our hockey team that battled to get back to the postseason this year. Football rebounded from a really tough start and they won that big game that really matters. So, it's one of those things where you really hope they get it right because those moments for those kids, they last forever. For the coaches, for the parents, for the wives of the coaches, for the booster people, everybody, even just fans like me, just a lacrosse coach watching a soccer game. I won't be forgetting that run anytime soon.
No question about that. Last thing before you go, Coach. I've been playing this game with every one of our guests. So here comes an any sport hypothetical, if you will, related to, of course, this tournament. Now, I did not factor in size or school. I picked some random town names and I matched them up against Leominster. But tell me if these, would whet your appetite. Leominster Beverly, Leominster Chatham, Leominster Amherst Pelham. Do those excite you perhaps the same way that Leominster Marlborough, Leominster Neshoba, or Leominster St. John's does for lacrosse?
I can't say that they do. Chatham would be cool. I used to vacation there when I was a little kid, but it's very far away from Leominster. Beverly, great program, very, very strong powerhouse in lacrosse. Playing them would be great. I can't remember the third one you said, but we just have that built-in rivalry already with Marlborough, with Neshoba, with Shepherd Hill, with Littleton, we haven't played in the last couple of years, but in any sport with St. John's, Fitchburg, Lunenburg, we're really looking forward to playing Lunenburg this year because they nipped us by a goal last year. And so, those local rivalries are what's special for me anyway. But once you get to the playoffs, I think you're happy just to be there and happy to be playing anybody. So I wouldn't complain with any of those tournament matchups, but I would hate to be playing a regular season game in Chatham. And I would hate to replace Neshoba, one of our longtime rivals, with Beverly. They're probably pretty equal. They're both very good lacrosse programs, but we just have so much stuff built up with Neshoba. It'd be more fun to settle it, but maybe some new rivalries will emerge with this stuff, and you never really know. But yeah, I'm partial to the Central Mass rivalries. There's just, when you've been coaching in one place for a long time, there's just a lot of history there and a lot of things you can bring up to motivate your team. And I'm sure half the time my kids are like, Coach, I was 6 years old when this game you're talking about happened. And I'm like, well, listen, we're still Leominster. They're still Marlborough or Neshoba or Fitchburg or whatever. And, you can get them to buy in that way. But, like anything else, we'll roll with the punches and see what happens.
Roll with the punches and adapt. Leominster head lacrosse coach Colin Davis, thank you so much for joining us here on Press Row, as we hope you and your family stay safe, as well as your student athletes, and we'll hope to have you back on the program and get out to see some of those games this year. A key when you're talking to AD Palazzi, more night games means more coverage. That's the recipe for being able to get out there as well.
Yeah, that's the plan. We're hoping to move to mostly night games in the future. We seem to pack the house a little bit more. Lets a lot of the parents get out of work and get to see their kids play. And man, there's nothing like Doyle Field lights. Any kid at the high school really who's played a sport on that field, it's a special place to play. It's one of the nicest facilities in Massachusetts for high school sports anyway. And it's an honor anytime we walk through that tunnel. So we hope to do that sometime again soon. And thank you so much for having me on, and best to you and your family as well.
Thank you so much, Coach. We'll look forward to hopefully seeing you in the coming weeks. For Leominster head coach Colin Davis, I am Todd Robbins saying thank you so much for being here on Rivalry Family Media's Press Row. You can like, subscribe, see all of the information right here on the screen for future coverage. Until next time here on Press Row, so long, everybody.